Welcome to Reader Seeks Romance Channel's Romance Roundup, the #1 romance book recs talk show. I am Liz Donatello.
And I'm Libby Kay, author of the sweet romance series Buckeye Falls.
Libby and I are sharing our romance book recs and the origin story of our show mascot, Jimmy, the boy coal miner. We're also delving into hallmarks of the romance genre. What does and doesn't have to be in a romance novel? Should romance be redefined for our contemporary audiences?
Dun, dun, dun.
Watch Romance Roundup on Reader Seeks Romance Channel and subscribe on YouTube. Listen to Romance Roundup on PodBean and all podcast apps. Viewers and listeners can email us at readerseeksromance@yahoo.com. And follow us on Instagram at LibbyKAuthor and at Reader Seeks Romance. Hello, Libby.
Hello, Liz. How are you?
I think we should dig right in because we
should too
to talk about. So, Libby, let the roundup begin.
Giddy up, Liz. Here we go. So I thought the first thing I was going to talk about, and it kind of ties into what you just mentioned in our lovely show intro. I wanted to give a follow-up. I finally read one of the summer books I said I was going to read that I didn't actually read yet. So
congratulations. Of the two of us, you are usually the one to read the books you say are on your TBR on the show, and then you like them, and then you talk about them. I have not been as lucky. Yeah. But you've been pretty lucky with that. I think you've mentioned a number of them that you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I will preface my review of saying I did like this book, but it's going to start another conversation. So the one that I wanted to talk about is Malibu Summer by Libby Gill. This came out the end of May from Penguin. This is Libby Gill's fiction debut. She is usually a nonfiction writer. So she has several nonfiction books under her belt. I was intrigued for a lot of reasons. A friend of the show and a friend in real life, after I described this book, had messaged me and said, "Are you crazy?" Because the premises of this one is about a woman who loses her husband in a bike accident. And my husband is a cyclist. So yes, I realized as I went into this that I had to, I was like, am I insane? And the answer is yes. So, the book is, I'll just give the general gist and then I will tell you what I loved about it. So it is an opposites attract single dad romance. There is a huge, huge plot point of grief because the premise of this book is we have Ivy, the heroine, and Conrad, the hero. They have both at the beginning of the book lost their partners. So the book is about these two people who are very different, overcoming a shared in the sense that they've both lost someone, but not that they had their lives are completely separate. There is not going to, be anything with that. These are two people coming together who are dealing with something horrible. So Ivy is a PhD candidate who focuses on soil studies. And so she, while she's working through her grief, takes a job at Conrad's Hollywood Malibu estate to basically bring his wife's garden back to life. And I know that's a weird way to phrase it.
I thought of that line from Bridgerton where the mother's talking about the garden needing
being in bloom or needing tending or something. Yeah.
Without warning, the garden has begun to bloom.
I have noticed that we have been reading a lot more books where protagonists are touched by grief.
Yes.
Which I would venture to say is because there are a lot more books being published that are dealing with grief. So, or is it just that we're just finding the few that are out there? I think it just seems to be more prevalent.
I think it's more prevalent because I was looking through during one of my sleepless nights when I when I scrolled through Goodreads, I felt like it was either it said the word grief in the description or it was very vague. And it's like the hero or the heroine is overcoming something or has like a checkered past or a depressing backstory. It's like that probably means they lost someone.
Right.
So, yeah. So that is definitely, I hate to say trending because saying grief is trending is really morbid, but I feel like it kind of is.
Grief is trending in romance.
Well, and thank you for wording it that way, Liz, because that's my question of the day. I will say I did enjoy this book. I read it in one sitting. It was a very quick read. There was a lot of secondary characters and a lot going on with that. I will say the secondary characters don't give the feel of, oh, I'm going to read a book soon, but with that person. It was just they were the friends and family of Conrad and Ivy. So, but the thing with this book that I noticed, and I started talking to my cousin who is a huge romance fan, and she had just read two books back to back that were marketed as romance. They have, you know, the cutesy illustrated covers, but she didn't feel that it was a romance. And I think the only downside or you know or slight ding I would give to this book is I wanted more of Conrad and Ivy as a couple. It was a beautiful story. I liked how Conrad and Ivy worked through their grief separately and together. I felt like I wanted there to be a little bit more payoff on the romance side of things. And so when I was talking to my cousin, she was saying that the last two books she read were very similar in that there were some great secondary characters, there were some great subplots, but it almost read as a fiction book with romance elements. And when we separately went back and did our online sleuthing, these are marketed as romance. And so my question to you and the world in general is this going to be a new shift in romance books? Is romance being the core focus of the story not necessarily a given anymore?
That's an excellent question. I think that it's marketing just shoehorning these books in, not that romance will be redefined to include these these very romance light books. I feel as if, because this seems like it's romance light. It's not, as we know, Romance Writers of America has created the standard definition, which should be updated. According to Romance Writers of America, a romance novel must have a central focus on the development of a romantic relationship between two people. The other criteria is that it must have an emotional through line and build to an optimistic conclusion. Now, actually, when you read it like that, it does seem loose enough to include the books that are romance light, but the definition has more popularly been listed as it has to be the central story is the relationship between people. RWA mentions two people. It obviously should be updated to include polyromance because there are polyromances with multiple partners. And also people might eventually have to be changed because
I was actually just thinking that after last week's alien discussion. I feel like people isn't sufficient anymore.
Right. So I don't know if you would just say beings, living beings, or beings, although you can't say
living because of the vampires.
Right. So I guess you would have to say beings, beings in the world, but then yet there's other worlds. So it would have to be definitely, I think that the definition should be reworded. Is romance evolving to a point where it's not the central story? I feel as if it's not consciously going there. I don't think it eventually will. I just think this is a product of marketers playing fast and loose with the definition to meet their own purposes, to meet their own sales goals.
Well, and I think you're onto something because God, now I sound like an infomercial. Liz, isn't romance usually the #1 genre fiction bestseller? I feel like through my work as a librarian over the years and just trying to attempt to have a pulse on the industry, romance is consistently a big seller. And yet and not as much lately, but you know, there's always been that stigma. But now I feel like it's the opposite. Now I feel like the romance readers are the cool kids. And maybe it's the marketers and the publishers are trying to get in on that excitement. Because I mean, I obviously I go through more than just the romance Bookstagram world, but I mean, romance is everywhere and I love it. And I want more of it. But I just feel like over the last year or so, some of the more recent things, and I'm noticing this in traditional and indie publishing. I don't feel like this is a traditional only thing. I just feel like it's not as, and honestly, maybe the writing is just getting better and there's more plot. I don't know, but I just feel like it's not just two people or, like you said, multiple people or human or beings finding their way together. And that definitely, and again, Malibu Summer was a great book. I am not saying it wasn't. By the time I was done with it, I was thinking of it more as a fiction book. And I like reading fiction too, so I was fine with that. But it was just, I didn't have that moment And I'll describe another book in a moment here that I just read that I loved. That wasn't that like heart, like, ooh, I love it. It was such a good ending, and I loved seeing these people get together. Like it was satisfying, but it wasn't swoony. How's that? I like that. Satisfying, but not swoony.
That's a great description. I think you've also hit upon what is the essence of a romance. At that emotional core is the swoon factor. And if it's not swoony, then I would say it's more of a love story that is within a work of fiction.
Yes.
And this brings us also, we could go into a whole other conversation about women's fiction. Women's
Mm-hmm.
fiction focuses on the protagonist's emotional journey. I feel as if there are a number of books that would normally have been categorized as women's fiction maybe 5 years ago, 3 years ago, and now they are being categorized as romance inaccurately. So I
Yes.
feel it because I noticed, I said, I don't hear so much about women's fiction books. Like, there was a time I just kept seeing, category, oh, women's fiction. It's like, I think it's because they're being
It's turned,
mislabeled
yeah.
as romance.
And because I chick lit, and I know that phrase hasn't been used
Oh,
recently, but
God,
I
yeah.
felt like chick lit at the turn of the century. I felt
Yeah.
like from basically the aughts through the early 2010s, I felt like it was chick lit everywhere.
Yeah.
And again, most of those did have strong romantic elements, but like you said, it was a story about women's emotional journeys.
Yeah.
And I mean, technically, Malibu Summer could do that too. But it was a really nice, she did her dual points of view very well. And so we got a lot of Conrad's grief and story as well, which again, very enjoyable. But I felt like I had a bit of a book hangover because I just wanted a little bit more of the two of them. I felt like just when it was getting good, it was like, and we're done. It's like,
Right.
damn.
Right. I'm also wondering if romance will eventually be defined differently depending on the publisher.
That's
Or
true.
because there are certain publishers I've noticed are putting out the types of books that you're like, oh, this is kind of barely a romance, but I guess it qualifies. And how they do that is, I think, dual point of view, because
Mm-hmm.
frequently when it's only from the point of view of the female protagonist or just one protagonist, it's usually less romantic, and I feel like it's further away from a real sink
Yeah.
your teeth in romance. So I feel as if there are little things that certain authors do to make it qualify as a romance. But if it doesn't have swoon, if it doesn't have tropes, um, tropes are usually indicative of this is going to be a romance.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like the heavy emotional issues, it's fine to have those in a romance,
Oh,
but
yeah.
it seems like I have read a few that's like, oh, there really wasn't too much of building that romance on the page. It was almost
Mm-hmm.
like the conflict didn't lie really between that couple. It was the personal conflict between her and her family, or him and his family.
Yes.
As far as what belongs in romance and what doesn't, and I hate saying belongs because it sounds so exclusive, but for the purpose of this conversation, what do you feel should be in a romance that is called a romance?
I truly feel like that has to be the central element. They can be overcoming grief. They can be raising a child on their own. They can be traveling with the rodeo. But the main conflict of the story should surround the couple and how they get to their happily ever after. For me as a romance reader, I need to feel like every chapter has some involvement with the love interest, whether it's a dual point of view or not. I need to feel like as a reader, it's like, oh yeah, don't forget these two people love each other, or don't forget they're going to get together. And I felt like, I'll pick my cousin's example. I'm not going to call out the book. Her
Mhm.
complaint was, and she, God bless her, she wrote a lit, or she did a tally. There were 22
Yeah.
side characters in that book. 22. And
Oh
she
my
said it
goodness.
got to the point where she had to remember to write down people's names. She had to, there was
Wow.
just a lot to keep track of. And she said she was getting distracted by all of these other characters' backstories.
Yeah.
So to me, that that obviously, I didn't read that book, so I can't speak from experience, but the way she described it almost sounded exhausting. She wanted to finish it. She was intrigued by the plot line, But yeah, it was just kind of like, oh, here's all
Okay.
these people. And it felt like instead of the secondary characters being the afterthought, it felt like they were the focus.
I wonder if that author put that many characters because they're planning on doing a huge series and wanted to kind of
I
introduce all
I
these
don't know.
people.
I'm not sure. But either way, that's a lot.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
lot.
I like to refer to those as the clown car cast, where
Yes, yes.
every few pages you have all these people popping up. And I do think that gets out of hand. The more side characters that are mentioned, the less of a romance it is, in my opinion. It
Yes.
becomes less and less. Like once you hit five side characters, you're like, okay, this is less of a romance. There's almost degrees of romance
Yes.
within.
Yes.
So I almost feel like there has to be now subcategories. Like this is like a level one romance. This is a level two romance. So that way you know what level of romance you're getting.
And the other thing with that is some people look at anything physical as being romance. So if it's like an erotic romance
Yeah.
and it's just sex on page one, again, not shaming that because I like that too. I
Right.
feel like that some people, and I've read some erotic romances and I don't feel the romance. It's just like, well, that was hot as hell, but now what? You know what I mean? It's like there obviously is a connection and an attraction, but that
Yeah.
necessarily emotional connection or element is lacking. And so
Yeah.
again,
It can be
mood
tricky.
reader, you might, depending on what mood you're in, I guess pun intended in this case, but
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely think that you need to have that chemistry, that sense of connection. Otherwise, it's kind of like, ugh. But this makes me think of Ashley Poston's book, A Novel Love Story. There obviously it is a romance. There is a romantic element, but I almost feel like that is a romance book, like a love story to romance readers. Like, you know what I mean? I felt like it was like a double romance. Um,
That's an excellent point. I actually am going to agree with you and take it a little further. I think
ooh.
that is actually the romance is is us like Ashley and the readers like we're in this romance in reading this book because
Yes.
there is a romance, but I feel the stronger one is the romance between romance readers and romance novels, specifically with Ashley. And like I felt closer to Ashley, the author,
Yes.
than I did to actually the protagonist. Because her voice obviously comes through, and because it's written in third person, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's, whenever it's third person, I do feel like I could pick up more of the narrative voice. And
Mhm.
I really felt like I was in a romance with Ashley, with the
Yes,
author.
yes, especially
Yeah.
because how she describes the town and the book
Yeah.
series and
Yeah.
how what was her main character's name? Eileen, how
Eileen. Yeah.
Eileen felt just about the series itself. The
Yeah.
series, and for those who haven't read it, it's a woman who gets stuck in the town of her favorite romance series, that the fictional town. So
Yeah.
it's I don't know, it's very
Yeah.
meta, I guess, in some ways. But it was
It's very meta. That's yeah.
yeah.
The bigger romance is not between the two protagonists. It's
Yes,
yeah,
it's
for sure.
yeah.
It's definitely a love letter to romance readers and romance writers. And yeah, I felt very close. I fell in love with Ashley Poston.
Yeah, me too. And I felt that was a satisfying read
Yeah.
because I had the swoon factor. I might have been swooning more over the idea of romance novels more than a couple at times,
Y-
but again,
Yeah.
I had that payoff of, oh, that's
Yeah.
nice. So it was,
Right.
you know,
And I know swoon could be subjective, but
yeah.
I think people understand. I think even if we have different ideas of what swoon is, you just know in your gut when you're reading it, oh, this is a romance.
Yes, yes.
Put it this way, if you're questioning whether or not this is actually a romance,
Then I don't think it
it
is.
probably isn't. And it's probably just categorized as such to, for lack of a better term, to cash
Yeah.
in on the popularity of romance, which I really feel like the pandemic changed
Hmm.
changed people's views of romance. So
Hmm.
now it's cool to say romance and not so much, oh, I'm a little embarrassed to say I read or write romance. So now everyone's like, oh, yeah, this is a romance. There's some kissing, and they will just make sure that they end up together in the end because happily ever
Yep.
after, the HEA, is also something you have to have in a romance. So I feel that there's
Absolutely.
these like these books that weren't written to be romance. They're like, oh, just put them together at the end and it's a romance, you know?
Yeah, it'll work out. Don't worry about it.
Also, if the characters aren't together for several chapters, I think that's not a romance.
Yes, unless there's
Yeah.
some like yearning and like if they're like totally separate and not communicating, agreed.
Is there anything left of this? Is there anything that we've left on the table that you'd like to pick up and run with?
I just wanted to take a moment and say that I feel like there's been a shift. And again, some of these books are all still enjoyable, but it's like if you're a mood reader like me and you're in the mood for that, like heart-wrenching or tugging on the heartstrings and I think I talked about a book and I can't remember what it was. It doesn't matter, but I enjoyed it. But it was, and again, not to say that mass market paperbacks are not romantic. It had so much subplot that wasn't mentioned in the description that when I was reading it, I was almost afraid that the cover was wrong. Like I had picked up another book because it had very, very heavy backstories. I think I mentioned this because it involved a school shooting and there was no trigger or content warnings.
Yes, you did mention
and so chapter 1, I'm like, wait a minute, this is heavy. And it had a very literal floral cover. And I thought, oh, this will be good. You know how it is. You're looking for that Saturday afternoon read. You don't want to think too much. And I ended up thinking way too much, Liz, and it pissed me off.
I don't blame you. Now, I wonder if what you just said is the reason why there are these in-depth book descriptions on the back of the book.
That's true. We're making fun of how long these descriptions are, but maybe that's what they're doing is they're saying, hey, Chucko, this is what it's going to be, so don't complain.
Yeah. Maybe that's also to maybe in sharing all that information on the back of the book, they're trying to keep readers informed enough to know, is this a level 1 romance? Level 1 being the highest, most romance you can get, or is this just something that's going to have more issues and maybe less romance? Like maybe that's why there's so much on the back, is to help people figure out, hey, what kind of romance am I dealing with here? Also, listening or watching Romance Roundup is a good way to figure out, hey, what's really romancy enough to read will help you figure out what books are romancy enough.
It's a public service, really.
Do you have another book to recommend, Libby?
Yes, and this is sort of a follow-up to one that we mentioned in our book cover episode. The cover is gorgeous, but the story inside is just as good. So I read Done and Dusted, which is book 1 in the Rebel Blue Ranch series by Lila Sage. This came out June of 23 from Dial Press. The second one has already come out, and later this fall, book 3 comes out, which I'll touch on in a second because I'm super excited. This book, for all I just talked about with romances and feeling like something's missing, this book was exactly what I wanted because it is a proper Western cowboy romance. It had every little element I would want. It kind of gave me, I'm saying back in the day, she still writes cowboy romances, but like 5 years ago, I got really into Maisie Yates and all of her different cowboy series. This is not quite the same, but it had that same, that same feel. This one, the first one, has brother's best friend and best friend's sister. So obviously I'm a fan of that trope as well. The thing I like about this is the description on the back isn't very long.
Oh, what a delight.
Yes. So the tagline for this one is, she's off limits, but he's never been good at following the rules. And damn it, I love taglines like that. It's like, give me everything you have, Lila Sage. I am here for it. So the general premise of this one is we have Clementine Emmy Ryder. She's at a crossroads, as most people are at the beginning of romance novels. She has accomplished everything on her to-do list. She has a successful career riding horses until, unfortunately, she has a setback where she is thrown off the saddle and mentally is having trouble getting back into it. But don't worry, Liz, because she's about to go back home to Meadowlark, Wyoming, and Luke Brooks is ready to help her get back in the saddle again.
Oh, so what a rugged name too.
I know. I literally, when I was reading it, I literally said, giddy up. I was so freaking excited.
You really need to write a cowboy romance entitled Giddy Up at some point in your career.
Yes, and then I will we'll go to like a dude ranch in Montana and I'll use it as a tax write-off or something. I'll be like, it's
Oh,
research, it's research.
yes.
That's what we can tell our husbands when we go to this dude ranch together.
I'm not even telling my husband. I'm just going to go missing for a
Yeah.
month.
Oh, I love it. So Luke Brooks is Meadowlark's notorious bad boy. So again, sign me up. I am here for it. He is also the owner of the local watering hole, and the last thing he expects is to see his best friend's sister walk into the bar after being out of town for so long. He has a reputation. She has a reputation as being a bit of a good girl. And but he can tell, despite all of his bad boy past, that there is something wrong with Emmy. And so, yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to go into the meat of the story, but he is going to help her get back in the saddle again in more ways than one. This book has the perfect setup for the rest of the series because it follows Emmy's brothers. This is a bunch of ranchers and cowboys, and it is deliciously cliche. And I mean that as the highest praise. This is someone who obviously has a passion for the Western tropes. Like, it was perfectly done. The one thing, and I know as I say this is going to sound really weird, but hear me out, Liz. The one thing that I think you're really going to like, and I thought of you, which again is weird, Luke's dirty talk in this book was like, I gasped. I was not expecting it at all. And I thought, ooh, Liz will like this. And then I thought, ooh, you shouldn't think that. But it's true.
Yeah, let's just leave that where it is.
Yes, we'll just let that sit.
I especially love the dirty talk when it is coming from a protagonist you didn't expect it to come from. So
Yes.
is it that just that you just didn't expect it, or based on the character, what you knew, like
Well,
it
that's the
was
thing.
out of character for him, do you think?
I wouldn't even say out of character because the story starts and you know, like, ooh, Luke is the bad boy in town.
Yeah.
Like he's been friends with the Ryder brothers, and he's been very helpful to them and very involved in their lives, but he's also been a bit of a womanizer, or at least that's his reputation.
Oh, okay.
And so you know that, but the way that he acts with Emmy is not like that. And so when it starts, I literally was like, oh my, I'm like, hello. And it was fabulous.
Yeah.
And and I hate to say it was done tastefully because that sounds funny, but it was like perfect for the story. Like it didn't feel out of place with how the rest of the sex scenes and everything went. So I know that's weird, but I have to say, like, that was a pleasant surprise. But the writing itself is fabulous. The story was fast paced. I am already on order for book 2, and book 3 comes out in November. I will say this is one of my favorite setups for a future couple, because it's book 3 is going to be Teddy, who is Emmy's best bud or best girlfriend, and then Gus, one of Emmy's brothers. They hate each other, and their back and forth banter throughout this book. Like, I wish their book was number 2, but it's number 3 and I have to wait. But it is just, I'm so excited. There's no way as I'm setting myself up for disappointment, but I just feel like there's no way that this will not be a good enemies to lovers when that comes out. And that one, I believe it comes out in November, and it's called Lost and Lassoed, and I'm here for it. Okay. Like, I need Teddy and Gus's story immediately. I think the only complaint I have is I wanted this book to be a little bit longer because I wasn't done interacting with this world, with these characters.
Interesting.
So Lila Sage really, for me, I mean, she set up a fan of the series. Like, I am eager to read the rest of them. And like we talked about before, the covers are gorgeous. They are. It's a lovely, I love when the cover's as nice as the story. So this is the type of book when I really just want a good romance. Lila Sage delivered. So I highly recommend Done and Dusted if you're in the mood for a cowboy western, because giddy up, Liz, it's ready to go.
Your excitement and enthusiasm for the book is so palpable. You're giving me chills.
Oh, good.
You're giving me chills.
Oh, well, mission accomplished.
There you go. And I also wonder what other books make you think of me when you're reading them.
Well, since you brought it up, that's a great segue to our next conversation point.
Is it?
Although I will say, totally unrelated, I have read books in the last 6 months, and I will finish it and I'll think Liz would hate this or Liz would love it.
Yeah. It's interesting because I do start to think in terms of, oh, this is a this is a Libby book.
Mm-hmm.
Or this is, oh, I bet you, even someone else we know in book club, I bet you this person would like this. Or
Yep.
I can
Yep.
almost hear what this person's saying. So it's kind of funny because it's almost like you're bringing everybody with you on your journey.
Yes. And I
fun.
think that's the thing. That's how my cousin and I fell down this rabbit hole talking about the romance genre. You
Yeah.
find your people and this is, it's
Yeah.
nice to have these people to have the conversation with.
Yeah.
And if you don't have those
Absolutely.
people, I hope that you consider them to be us, folks.
Oh, that was a good show promo.
Shameless plug. What have you read lately that you're excited about? Or is there anything you want to, going back to the therapy mode, is there anything you want to discuss today?
I have one book that I adored. And before I get into it, I
Mm-hmm.
have a story to tell. A story
Ooh.
about a young boy who works in a coal mine named Jimmy.
Oh, little Jimmy.
So, fans of the show know that Romance Roundup's mascot is Jimmy, the boy coal miner. And for those of you in need of reminding or who are unfamiliar, Jimmy, as he was named by Libby, first appeared in episode 25, which is our single mom, single dad romance episode.
Which
And
is funny that that's where we started talking about him.
yes, it is. It is. And here's a clip from episode 25 that also features a picture of Jimmy, which is actually a public domain photo that I found online of a boy coal miner with a pickaxe and smoking a pipe. So that's Jimmy. And here's the clip.
The thing I liked about this, and this is going to sound funny considering this is our single parent episode, the kids were in it just enough, if that makes sense.
Yes.
They were there
Yes.
when they needed to be. They were not there when they didn't need to be.
Mhm.
I can't even tell you their names, Liz. That's how I just remember they were sweet. They got the
Yeah.
job done and they went home. So like
The way
the
you
idea
just
of it,
described it, it sounded like kids working at a sweatshop. It's
that's
like, I just want you to get into your job and get out.
yeah. Go work in the mines for a little while and you can go home and go back to school.
Here's your pail of food.
Yeah.
Get lost.
Thanks, little Jimmy. We'll see you tomorrow.
Hopefully.
Yeah. This took a turn.
I love the thought of your little Jimmy crawling into the mine with a little pickaxe.
And like a little canary in a cage. Anyway.
Since then, Libby and I have been on the lookout for a coal miner romance, and we did our best in many episodes to wish that book into existence. And debut author Logan Sage Adams has made all of our dreams come true. So I absolutely adored Male Gay Historical Romance Our Own Light by Logan Sage Adams. Our Own Light, released by the author on August 22nd, 2024. Before I go any further, I'd love for Libby to share how she discovered Our Own Light, because I found out about it through Libby, and Libby texted me super excited for having found a real deal coal miner romance. Even the book cover, it's a wonderful illustrated cover in the mine.
In a freaking coal mine.
So Libby, can you share how you found this book by a debut romance author, which they can be difficult to find, especially the indie variety. So
Yes.
please share your story.
So I one of my favorite pastimes, which probably is not a good pastime because it's probably killing my brain. I love to just scroll through, but I have a bazillion people I follow on Bookstagram, and one of the ones I follow, and I think I've mentioned her before. Her handle is Paper Back in the Day, and I think we should have her on because I love most of her recommendations.
Oh, okay, yeah, let's do that.
But she does great. Her page is primarily it's male romance, and it's one of my favorite follows because she always has it's mostly indie authors. But she has a variety of romance posts every week, several. And she had one that was new releases for August. And I was just, scrolling, not paying much attention. And all of a sudden, I just saw it said coal mine. And I went, holy crap. And then I saw the picture of the book and I'm like, oh my God. And so, yeah, I found it on her page. And then, of course, I immediately followed Logan Sage Adams and read the blurb and sent you a screenshot and was squealing because my husband came into the room and he said, oh my God, is everything okay? And I said, it is, because Liz and I found our coal miner romance.
It's a bookish miracle that this exists. And I am even more thrilled that I loved the book, because a coal miner romance could have gone awry. It could
Yes,
have.
and it would have broken our hearts. And I haven't read it yet. Full disclosure, I've been under deadline, but it is literally on the top of my TBR. I am staring at it now. It is taunting me.
Yeah.
I cannot wait. I also cannot wait to hear what you think, because frankly, Liz, if you liked it, then I think we're going to be A-okay.
Yeah, I think, although we do have some differences in our tastes. So
But not when it comes to coal miners.
Well, I would hope not. I think we're solid. We're unified on that one. Set during the Roaring '20s in a West Virginia mining town, Our Own Light is an opposites attract romance between Floyd, a cinnamon roll of a coal miner who is heartbroken from grief, and Oliver, a city slicker with golden retriever energy who moves away from his toxic, affluent family with hopes of forging his own identity by working in the coal mines. And like, even the names, I'm like, these are good old timey 1920s names. Honestly, I would love to talk to Logan about research, because
Yes,
I think Logan might be a time traveler, because there was so much that sounded like authentic, or what I mean, it felt authentic. It read as authentic. So, Our Own Light is a stunning debut. It's an emotionally compelling, incredibly sweet, and a little bit sexy, slow burn with low angst. So, I like to call this slow and low. And slow and low is actually what I have been gravitating to in my romance. As soon as I see something where it says angsty, I'm like, no, I don't want angsty. I don't want an alpha hole. I don't want a guy who's aloof and so difficult to break that tough exterior. I'm like, I'm not. And so it's not like that. This is just a beautiful read. This is, if you were gonna rate like romance, what tier based on our conversation earlier, I would say this is a tier 1. Every page is about the romance, is about their friendship that, builds first and then eventually authentically builds into this wonderful romance. I very much enjoyed being immersed in a setting that I haven't visited in a romance novel. I have read kind of turn of the century Gilded Age. I have not read anything in the Roaring '20s. Have you read anything around that time in a romance?
If I have, it was focused on the glitz and glamour and the, speakeasy culture. And of course, I can't think of a darn one of them. But, and again, I haven't read it yet. Yeah. But judging from the description and the fact that it's West Virginia coal mines, I feel like it's not going to have that stereotypical flapper backstory or backdrop.
It doesn't, because it's a very, and you get to learn a lot about how a mining town worked at that time, how they had their own money. Like the coal mine company set them up with their own money, and you could only buy from their stores.
Yes. Right? I remember hearing about that in history class, which again sounds really weird that's what I remember because the mining towns kind of owned the workers in a sense, right?
They did. So Oliver comes in almost like bringing the outside world to this town, where he's sharing his stories and the different experiences he's had, which gives you a glimpse of the Roaring '20s that we popularly know of, about like the jazz music and getting a phonograph and having fun and all that. So and most importantly, from reading Our Own Light, I learned what the occupation of little Jimmy most likely was.
I'm hoping it wasn't scary, but I have a feeling it was.
Well, I mean, I guess scary if there's a cave-in, which I don't know, because, that was always a risk. So the real life boy coal miner in the picture that I use for Jimmy in episodes, because we've mentioned Jimmy in a number of episodes, and I've flashed this picture of this little boy in a coal mine. That's a real photo. And I'd imagine that the boy in that photo most likely was a breaker. So breaker boys would use their hands to break coal into smaller pieces so they could separate the impurities like rocks and clay and soil from the coal. And then that coal would go up the conveyor belt out into the, I don't know, I guess out into the world where there were the bins or the, that minutia is a little lost in me. But
I'm all of a sudden picturing, was it the second Indiana Jones movie where they're down and the kids are working and it's all dark and scary?
Absolutely.
For some reason, that just popped into my head.
You know what? That is an excellent visual, because I did at times think of something kind of like that. So there's some humor in the story, so many gestures and so many.
That's what I kept reading is the sweetness. They kept saying it was sweet, but not, I mean, obviously I write sweet stuff, so I'm okay with sweet stuff. But they said it was perfectly sweet is some of the descriptions I was finding.
It was so sweet. Now, it's not closed door. There are some scenes there somewhat descriptive, and there's another part of the story that is mentioned on the back of the book, but I don't want to say it because I didn't read the back of the book, to be honest. Like,
oh my God. So I had sold you that much on my screaming text message of, Liz, we have to read this book.
You did. You absolutely did. So when I read it, there's a big part of the story that's mentioned up front that I didn't know about. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is such a wonderful twist. And again, I think accurate to how this romance would have played out in 1920.
Okay.
And the circumstances of Floyd's home life. I definitely recommend, if you're into exploring something new, coal mining romance. I'm hoping this is going to become a thing. So I definitely recommend reading Our Own Light by Logan Sage Adams. If you like it slow and low, this is the book for you.
Well, I feel like we're entering slow and low time of year. Isn't that usually, I always think of that with like using your crock pot in the fall.
Yes.
So when you said that, like I'm picturing like making something cozy for dinner, curling up with this book. It sounds perfect.
Maybe we should call it a crock pot read.
I think crock pot's trademark, so we'll have to call it slow cooker.
You're right. You're right. So we have to call it slow cooker romance.
People are going to be like, what the hell is this?
Oh, my goodness. Oh, and one quick thing, something that developed in a text of ours is an FDNF, which I thought I want to mention because I wanted to catch on. So there's DNF, which means did not finish. And, I don't claim do not finishes on Goodreads. I just delete the book. Okay, I don't claim it. There are people who claim that as a book that's on, it counts as your book you've read, which I don't do. So when I'm really mad at a book and do not finish it, I call it an FDNF, which is for F and did not finish. So I feel like I want to put that out there, that if there is a DNF that you really were mad about, it's like, you really disappointed me and now I'm not finishing you, that's an FDNF. I feel like we need to have an episode of all FDNFs where we don't mention the title or the author, but we just lightly, almost vaguely talk about these books, just to get it off of our, get it off our
therapy. Book therapy.
Again, I'm starting to feel more and more as if therapy needs to be part of our episodes.
We can put it, we're working on the schedule for next year. We'll add it in.
Is that it?
That's all I got.
All right. Well, that's our roundup. Watch Romance Roundup on Reader Seeks Romance channel and subscribe on YouTube. Listen to Romance Roundup on PodBean and all podcast apps. Thanks for joining us, romance readers.
Happy reading, everyone.